Hey folks, here's some news for you. CISA and the FBI released their publication called Product Security Bad Practices, and it's changing the way medical device manufacturers are expected to secure and furthermore design their products. Today on the show, we have Jacob Barkai, who's a distinguished product architect at Edwards Lifesciences. He's telling us all about what medical device manufacturers should do to remain compliant. Jacob, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. A pleasure.
It's wonderful to have you. So, Jacob, can you please tell us a bit more about yourself? What was your journey and how did you end up in medical device security?
Sure. So my career started as a software engineer back in days, which I can't even remember when it was. I moved to several positions since then, software engineering and then software architecture, software leading. And at some point of time, I transitioned to the cyber world. It was about, I think, 8 years ago or so when I found myself performing security researching for vulnerabilities in mobile devices. And then pretty quickly, I started to work in the medical devices world, initially in Medtronic as a security architect and then principal security architect for the GI business units. And in the last almost 4 years now, I'm working for Edwards Lifesciences as a product security lead for the corporate, dealing with exciting projects approaching ahead. And here I am.
Oh, wow. What a journey it's been. All right. Yeah. And I noticed that you've been writing some articles on LinkedIn. So I found you initially. You were commenting on CISA's new release, which is called Product Security Bad Practices Guidance, which is from October. Can you give us an overview of what this guidance says to medical device manufacturers?
Yes,
or
absolutely.
Manufacturers in general.
Yeah, I think it will be even wiser to get some context around this guidance that CISA and the FDA
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
please,
created in last October, as you said. So we can say that this guidance didn't came up out of nowhere, out of the blue. It's basically a continuation of an effort from both regulatory bodies and governments around tackling legacy devices around cybersecurity. When it comes to legacy devices, specifically for medical equipment, things are quite messy in the industry. And, I think it was November 2023 when the FDA asked MITRE to create a guidance document that speaks about the best way to move legacy devices to the new world of cybersecurity. And, again, the medical devices world is quite complex because hospitals and clinics do have working devices and their facilities. And they are very reliable, those devices. They are using it for years. They have tons of them in the inventory. It's not such an easy task for them to just drop everything, refresh the inventory, and bring up and buy new devices, which includes cybersecurity internally. And so the struggle is how to mitigate the situation when you have a bunch of devices. Some of them, many of them actually are on an end of life situation when they are no longer officially supported by the manufacturers. Many times even they were purchased on the second-hand markets by resellers, and they are really lost the ability to get updated by new code, by new features, by new firmware in order to cover the cybersecurity. And so this chatting was about how to take legacy devices and making them more secure. This is a chatting that was around for many years now. But honestly, I didn't see any real organization that take a real decision and decide what to do with these legacy devices. The question stays in the air. Okay, we have legacy devices. We don't have enough money or time or attention to deal with them, where now people who knows how to maintain those legacy devices. Some of the people are also already not part of the company, and we're putting our efforts on new devices to come to the market. So legacy devices, it's kind of okay, it will be fine, So the FDA came with this document on November 2023. There wasn't too much discussion about this document. And last October 2024, together with the FDA, came up with a document, as you mentioned, named Product Security Best Practices.
Yep.
Way they are, again, emphasizing the importance of having not only legacy devices, but specifically devices which are built upon some bad practices, of course. And you can consider medical devices as part of this world that they are mentioning. So they are basically targeting devices which are performing critical infrastructure job, and also something which is called National Critical Functions, or NCFs. So when it comes to those kind of devices, they claim that CISA, when they are not secure enough, they can create an immediate impact for national security, for public safety, for many things. And the industry must do something about it. Now, among the things that they are presenting, which are bad practices, you can find also the fact that many of them are not incorporating adequate password management or MFAs.
Yeah.
But one thing particularly interesting is the fact that they are asking manufacturers, software manufacturers, whether medical devices or any other industry, to get away from unsafe programming languages. Unsafe. So
why is this focus particularly important for medical devices versus the other things that are cited in the document?
Yeah, so when it comes to medical devices, we're speaking about mission critical systems, which relies on runtime processes of operations, which relies on deterministic operation. You want to have things right away without any gaps and any lags in time. And that really brings the manufacturers to work with low level, if you want to call it, or previous generation languages like C and C++, which can directly interact with operating system and drivers and the kernel, and are basically the most suitable solution to create those kind of embedded devices.
Because they have the ability to perform, they have high scalability. Well, they're just particularly useful in medical devices because of different advantages that they have as well, right? Compared to other languages, they consume less energy. They tend to have access to more things. Is that why as well they're particularly used in devices?
Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, one of the things are the power management, that you have full control on that. And when you have handheld medical devices, then battery consumption is something that you really want to keep over time. You are dealing with limited resources in RAM, in CPU, in storage. So this kind of real-time machines must be developed using those low-level programming languages, or the previous generation. Yes. And those C, C++ kind of languages are inherently coming with security risks that stems from memory management. And the concern that CISA and the FDA are putting is the fact that most of the vulnerabilities in recent years are stemming from memory management problems, which you usually don't find in managed languages.
Yeah, makes sense. There's just new generations of code that's a bit better. You talked in your article about a typical attack that can be done, like some examples of attacks. Can you give us one example of an attack that can be done if we're using C++ through memory attacks?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the common attacks or known attacks recently discovered is when it comes to BLE, to Bluetooth, basically. So there is a famous attack. Many devices are relying on Bluetooth in this way or other. Like medical devices relying on Bluetooth for communicating between the embedded device itself to a mobile device or to other devices. It's a very popular communication medium that they are relying on. And there was a research recently, there were several researchers actually recently, which presented an attack scenario where you can basically create a buffer overflow by flooding the messages or just adjusting a bit the communication protocol in a way that the driver, which runs the BLE module, basically created an out of service for the device. Like you are flooding the protocol with very specifically crafted, if you will, packages. Those packages are then get consumed by the network interface of the BLE, and the BLE's driver is loading those packets into the buffer. And what actually is happening is a buffer overflow just by sending packets over. And this is something you can't really avoid, I must say, because again, when it comes to C++ or low-level programming languages, and you must run drivers, you must interact with hardware, then this is basically the only way that you can achieve it. It's not that you can start using C# or Java. You can actually in some way, but you will lose a great degree of performance.
Yeah, it's interesting what you say. We'll get to what you can do in order to mitigate these consequences. But first, denial of service is a pretty big deal, especially if you're dealing with things that are urgent kind of medical devices, right? Or life-sustaining. Because if all of a sudden things stop working, then we've seen examples of situations where battery can be depleted in 2017 for pacemakers, and then you have to recall the devices to fix vulnerabilities in memory.
Correct.
So, yeah, it's a big deal. So risk should definitely be treated. But question, we touched on this topic, but if it's so vulnerable, this type of coding, then why do we still use this kind of code languages today? Why can't we just shift to other types?
Yeah, so good question. So indeed, those kind of languages are the bread and butter for interacting with kernel mode, with drivers, with hardware, basically, because you gain full control on memory consumption and you have a suitable environment to have power management and battery management and everything that you need to have to run continuously medical devices, basically. And as you said, medical devices is something that you can't just say, okay, it will work today and maybe tomorrow it will work 50%. It's not working like that when it comes to medical devices. There's a patient safety in the stakes, and you must create reliable devices. The fact that, first off, again, this is like intrinsic issue that C and C++ are those kind of languages that runs against kernel and drivers and operating systems. The other problem is the fact that you have tens of thousands of devices around the world that you even don't have a good tracking on who holds what. This is one of the things, by the way, that CISA's documents and the FDA documents are claiming, that in many cases, medical device manufacturers, MDMs, don't even have an up-to-date tracking records for where
software bill of materials.
Yeah, not software bill of materials, that's one thing, but also they actually don't know where those devices are located, whether it's in this vendor, or in this hospital chain, or this clinic, because after a long period of time, those kind of devices are just shifting hands very quickly. One healthcare chain that decides to modernize their devices are just selling those devices to other companies or other resellers, and those resellers then moving those to other lower budget healthcare systems, and you just completely losing track. So one of the things is the fact that it's not easy to just collect those devices and refurbish them or upgrade them, because you just don't know where they are. This is a physical issue. And the third thing is that those devices are relying so deeply on those kind of languages that just replacing the code base with modernized languages, say C# or Ruby or Python or Java, just make no sense, because it basically means that you are going to replace their entire device. And this is not something that MDMs want to deal with. there is some initiatives to transfer to memory managed languages like Rust, which incorporate some nice features. You can avoid multiple types of vulnerability. But again, moving C++ and C to Rust requires a lot of work from the MDMs, and this is something that's possible.
Yeah, and there's so many libraries or just pieces of code, open source software that relies on C++ and C, that it's hard, right? You have these libraries would have to be updated as well. So there's a whole piece of understanding what's out there, and even then, manufacturers are only starting now to really document what's inside of their medical device software. So finding and changing that is especially difficult. You talked about a hybrid method in your article, that you could use certain safer languages for things that are more exposed and then keep C and C++ for other codes that relies more on component, does the core functionality. Can you tell us more how that works and what are the benefits, drawbacks of this kind of methods?
Sure. Indeed, one of the more reasonable solutions to this situation is, instead of replacing your entire code base with a newer language, which is memory safe, is the fact that you can try and replace only specific parts on your ecosystem, which are, let's call it security prone, cybersecurity vulnerability prone, with languages which are memory safe, like Python, C#, Java, all the others, and keep only the core components of your device ecosystem with C and C++. In that way, you're basically eliminating or reducing the attack surface from your medical device ecosystem without losing the precious performance requirements of the device itself. The idea is that anything that is internet facing, for instance, any module or any component in the ecosystem which is internet facing or network facing, will be replaced with memory managed language. So it will be easier to maintain those regions. It will be easier to maintain them, and in terms of cybersecurity, it will be easier to observe the code that is required to be protected. And once you are protecting this ring, if you will, and then basically the operation itself of the medical device will be performed by the C++ code. That's how you basically can create an isolation between your publicly facing network of the device or ecosystem and the internal logic of the device.
Mm-hmm. And that should come, ideally for new manufacturers, that should come within the design phase, where in the threat modeling process, you understand where attackers could come from, or what are the risks coming from, and then after that, secure the perimeter. But what if you're not a new manufacturer, you're a manufacturer that's already got a device out there, and it's going to go beyond 2030 because the recommendation that we're talking about does not apply to devices that are beyond 2030. So what if let's say your device is still on the market, you're still selling it, how you're supposed to do a roadmap as part of what the FDA and CISA recommend. How would you recommend to go about this?
Yeah. So the thing is that indeed CISA's and FDA in FBI's guidance document does present timelines like 2026, January 2026, and it also claims that even now in 2025, medical device manufacturers need to start creating or establishing the work towards 2026, but nothing in the document really says that this is an obligation for medical devices. It's still a recommendation, and it's not something which is enforced by law. So it's true that in 2026, the MDMs need to present with a roadmap of what they are going to do with those devices, what is the plan to ensure that those devices will be more protected than they are now. But the regulators are claiming that in 2026, they will need to present a non-obligatory roadmap. But my guess is that somewhere in mid-end of 2026, it's going to be transferred to be obligatory for medical device companies. And not only medical device, but any company which runs critical infrastructure. 2026 is a milestone, which is currently not enforced, but it will be enforced 2026 or 2027, I guess. Now, the 2030 milestone, again, this is, for me, it's like an arbitrary year. It's a cutoff for companies to, as you said, if there is a device which is not intended to be in continuous work
Use?
in 2023, basically you can avoid dealing with it. But for anyone who is intending to move after 2026 with his devices, which I guess most of them are, because again, medical devices is not something you are replacing too often. You're replacing them maybe once in 20 years, 15 years. And anyone who is willing to keep the devices running after 2030, my suggestion for them is just start do the work yesterday. Not today, but yesterday, really. Because it takes a lot of time to re-architect some aspects of, or all aspects of the device in order it will be secure against those kinds of memory issues. You'll need to find the best way to do that in terms of manpower, in terms of your overall marketing, even strategies.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of functions here that needs to work together in order to make it happen. And of course, regulation. If you are touching any part of the device which will require you to resubmit this device to the FDA. Once again, this is an event that companies need to take a real consideration. So in the time frame, the timelines of medical devices and regulated medical devices, 5 years from now, it sounds a long time, but effectively it's just behind the corner.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, just behind the corner. So if you're a consumer medical device manufacturer, you already have a few devices out in the market. How do you go about building this process and then executing this process of shifting to more secure coding practices?
Yes, and a good question, because again, it combines multiple vectors of operation. Now, one thing I think it makes sense to notice here is the fact that there are some projects now that are running which are claiming or trying to make C and C++ more secure. So maybe it's not such a big deal. If we said that moving to Rust is a big deal because you're changing your code base and you're relying on third-party libraries which are C, C++ based. So there are some projects nowadays, at least 3 projects that I'm aware of, which are trying to take the current C, C++ languages, syntax and everything, and just wrap them around with secure methodologies. One of them is the secure, I think it's called the Secure C++ project, which basically takes C++ and enhances it with features that you can find in Rust, like the borrowing mechanism. There are other projects that are trying to take C language and make it more secure with minimal code changes and efforts. So this is one thing that companies need to start investigate. If they can start using any of these projects to slowly but safely moving to a secure code base. This is one thing from the tech stack perspective. The other perspective is retaining people who knows how to code in those languages. It sounds funny, but in 2025, finding people who really knows deeply how to work with C and C++ is not trivial, because those languages, although are running critical infrastructure, much less popular nowadays than Python or C# or Java or any other, or JavaScript, of course. So finding or establishing teams that still runs C++ on your company, this is a very important task to do. And of course, preparing the regulation, the business units in your companies, this is something which is also very important, because you need to communicate for them the changes that you're going to perform, and you need to consult with them what will be the best way to show this to the regulator. The most suitable situation is when you don't need to have any resubmission. It's just something which is called letter to file. As long as you can keep to the letter to file strategy, this would be, again, a good practice.
Got it. Okay. So if we recap, then what you want to do is look at the current projects that exist with replacing potentially the current versions of C and C++ to, let's say, more safe versions. If this were to be done for a medical device manufacturer, how much work would that involve? What would be the steps if you decide to move to one of those projects?
So first off, ensure that you understand well what exactly inside your device, how it is written, and then piece by piece basically start to move to any kind of approaches that you will to use, whether it's the new language sets like the Secure C++, or even refactor some of your code to higher level languages like C#. But my suggestion again is not do it like everything at once, but slowly and with small pieces, because everything needs to be validated eventually against the various ISAs that you have, that you can find in the medical device world.
Wonderful. Makes a lot of sense. Jacob, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, explaining the articles you worked hard on. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Oh, what an episode it's been, folks. And here are my top learnings that I got from this episode. Number 1, legacy medical devices often use C and C++ programming languages due to their performance benefits and direct hardware controls. But these languages are inherently vulnerable to memory-related security issues that lead to serious security breaches. So what can we do about it? Number 2, a practical solution is to adopt a hybrid approach. Use memory-safe languages like Python or Java for network-facing components, so more exposed, while keeping C and C++ for core device functionality that requires highest performance and direct hardware access. Number 3, medical device manufacturers, if they're planning on keeping their medical devices in the long run, meaning beyond 2030, should really look at the 2026-2030 security requirements, including investing in products that can make C and C++ code more secure, retain high-skilled developers, and carefully planning transitions to avoid regulatory resubmissions requirements. Oh, and one more thing. Do you know that you can get actionable advice every week from me in your inbox by going on... Oh, and one more thing. Do you know you can get actionable... Oh, and one more thing. Do you know you can get one actionable tip every week on how to make your device more secure by signing up at cyberdoctornotes.com? Well, now you do. I'll see you on the next one.